Hello students, I'm Mouchandra and today we'll start with the second lecture of the chapter, Evolution. So in the previous class, we looked into the topics like how the universe originated, like what theory was proposed, that is a Big Bang theory. Then after, the vast universe was formed, how the Earth originated in the galaxy, Milky Way galaxy, and how was the conditions in the early Earth. And after millions of years, life evolved on Earth. So we talked about the origin of life as well. So people proposed various kind of theories to explain how life originated. So among the three that we studied, we know that the accepted theories of the chemical evolution and biogenesis. And then we saw that what was the first life form, like non-cellular life form, when it did arrive on Earth, then when did the first cellular life form arrive. And lastly, we discussed in brief Darwin's theory of evolution, which is based on the famous quote, survival of the fittest, right? And natural selection. So in this lecture, we will continue this discussion on evolution, but we'll look into few more relevant topics. So we saw that Darwin said that yes, life forms has evolved. Okay, and he proposed the mechanism of evolution to be the natural selection. So what all evidences are there to prove that really evolution happened? Like really, uh, like different type of species evolved from one another. Okay, over the period of time. So various kind of evidences are there to prove that evolution is a actual thing. So first evidence comes from paleontology, which is basically the study of fossils. Okay, and what are fossils? Fossils are actually the remains of life forms that are found in rocks. So you must have seen images of different kind of shells and dinosaur fossils in museums, etc. So people actually find these fossils in rocks. Now these rocks, over the period of time, they form sediments. Okay, and the sediments form layers in the Earth's crust. Okay, one layer over the other. So when paleontologists they do excavation at a particular historical site or like any geographical area, so they actually dug through the different layers of the sediment in order to find rocks or in order to find fossils that belong to different eras of the history of Earth. So different age rock sediments, they contain fossils of different life forms. So people have found that fossils that belong to different kind of organisms, and these fossils were found in different layers of sediment. So it means that when that particular sediment was in the formative stage, at that period of time, that organism has died. Okay, so that is how they do uh, they actually recognize at what period of the history that organism lived. So each sediment layer, people have given a name that is called geological period. Okay, so you if you search the geological periods of Earth, you can find all the different names that paleontologists have given, and depending on where that particular fossil was found in which sediment layer, they said that they belong to or they lived during this particular geological period. The fossils of extinct organisms, their age is predicted. Okay, how they do that? They do that using the method called carbon dating, which actually uses a radioactive isotope of carbon, that is C14. Okay, and this C14 radioactive isotope is actually present in both living and dead organisms. So they actually see how far that particular radioactive isotope has decayed, okay, how much of it has decayed. So, and they compare it with the current, compare it with the C14 isotope present in the living organisms like us. So that is how they estimate the age of the fossils, like how many years ago they lived, as well as which geological period they lived in. So through the study of fossils, people have found that what people have found, they have found that many extinct organisms, they are similar to modern organisms. Okay, and also the features of the organisms that were found over different geological period or of different ages. So their features actually varied over time. Okay, and they also saw that certain organisms, they only lived during a particular geological period, means their entire species were extinct after a given geological period. So it is true for the dinosaurs. Okay, similarly various other species are also like that. Another evidence for evolution comes from the study of embryos. Okay, it was actually proposed by Ernest Haeckel. So he observed that certain features during embryonic stage is common to all vertebrates, but these features are absent in the adults. Okay, for example, the presence of gills is actually seen in embryos of all vertebrates, including humans. But these gills actually persist only in fishes, means persist towards adulthood only in the fishes, whereas in humans, they are not required anymore. So can you guess why gills would be needed for the developing embryo, developing fetus of a human? Can you guess that? Um, so that question is left up to you. But this theory was then disapproved by Carl Ernest von Baer. Okay, so he gave very logical arguments to disapprove this particular theory. So that is not the that those arguments are not the scope of this particular class. Now, another evidence for evolution comes from when people have compared the anatomy of the organisms as well as their morphology, means how they look. Okay, anatomy means the bone structure and the organs, muscles, etc. So from that comparison, we can actually divide the process of evolution into two types. One is called divergent evolution, and another is called convergent evolution. So first, let's understand what is divergent evolution. So divergent evolution actually refers that similar anatomical structures they have actually developed along different directions in order to perform different functions, and in order because they had to adapt to different environmental needs. Okay, so divergent, you can think of it like a small point. Okay, and due to different adaptive conditions, like different habitat conditions, uh, the structure, the anatomical structure, they actually evolved to get different functions. So it's like from one point in different directions, the evolution has happened. So hence the name divergent. Okay, you can visualize this evolution process like this: from a point in different direction, the evolution has happened. Okay, and remember, here we are concerned only about the anatomical structure. Okay, how similar anatomical structures at, say, different organisms, okay, they actually evolved to perform different functions. That is divergent evolution. Also, the anatomical structure, since they are so similar in structure, they are called homologous, like homologous chromosomes. Okay, but they are not identical. They are homologous. Okay, they exist with a degree of similarity with each other. Also, this kind of homology refers to common ancestry. Okay, means means there was a common ancestor which belonged at the center, okay, and who had a particular anatomical structure. And from the common ancestor, their progenies they move to different environmental conditions, and these environmental conditions actually force their progeny to, you know, make use of their anatomical structure for to perform different functions. So when there is homology in anatomical structure, it indicates that all these progenies that adapted in different directions, they all came from a common ancestor. Maybe that ancestor lived millions of years ago. Okay. Also, apart from studying anatomical structure, since we are living in post genomics era, like we can actually sequence the genes, and we also know what are types of proteins are there in the cell, so we can also use that information in order to say whether the process of evolution is divergent. So people have found that there are various kind of genes and proteins, and these genes and proteins, they perform similar functions. Okay, they have the same function or similar function among diverse organisms. So these actually points to common ancestry. Okay, that is, there was a common ancestor who had some uh, some set of genes. Okay, to perform a function, like say housekeeping genes. Housekeeping genes are those genes which are always expressed. If they are not expressed, that organism will die. So and they are required for every other biochemical reaction. So there are some set of genes which are housekeeping genes, and it was expressed in the ancestor. And now, when from the ancestor, their progenies they evolved in different directions. All their progenies, all their subsequent generations of organisms, they all had the same genes performing the same function of housekeeping. Okay, so now we can also use this particular information in order to say that there existed a common ancestor, means the evolution has happened divergently. Okay, one example, a few examples of divergent evolution is when you see the bone pattern of four limbs. So in human, cheetah, whale, bat, okay. So all of them have four limbs. That is the hands. That four limbs are the hands through which we eat. So the anatomical structure, the bone structure of the hand, you have studied that it consists of a long bone humerus, right? This is humerus. Then there is radius and ulna. Then there are carpals and metacarpals, and the digits or the phalanges. So similar kind of bone structure is also seen in the cheetah, okay, and also in whales, then in bats. But these four limbs, they perform different functions. Like for man, we use for eating. For cheetah, they use their four limbs to run. For whales, they use it for swimming, right? And for bat, they use it for flying. So since they move to different habitat, and they had to adapt to that particular habitat, so they made use of these four limbs to perform different functions. Okay, so that is one example. Another example can be seen in plants as well. This is in animals, this is in plants. So there are plants named bougainvillea and cucurbita. So bougainvillea, you must have seen bougainvillea leaves, pink colored leaves. Okay, so that particular plant or a tree, okay, it is often seen everywhere actually, every part of the country or in India. And also cucurbita means the cucumber plant. So both of these plants have a structure called thorns and tendrils. So these thorns and tendrils, they actually play different role. Thorns, like, not allowing predators to feed on their leaves, right? So it is quite sharp, whereas tendrils, it helps the plant to, climb. So although these two structures, they play different functions, but anatomically, they are quite similar, okay? So they are homologous structures. So that is an example, another example for divergent evolution. Now, coming after understanding divergent evolution, convergent evolution is actually the opposite. Okay, here convergent evolution, here what happens? The different anatomical structures, okay, they actually evolved to perform similar functions, okay, because they had to adapt to similar habitats. So here you can imagine convergent evolution like this. So there were organisms who were living, in similar habitats, but they have different anatomical structures. So in order to survive to the similar habitat, their anatomical structures actually evolved to uh, to perform similar function. So in this direction, converged. Okay, so different anatomical structures these organisms have, and they actually made use of these different structures in order to perform similar function, because all these organisms they lived in a similar habitat. Um, and these anatomical structures here will be called analogous, not homologous, analogous. Analogous means these structures, they are comparable, okay? And they are only similar in terms of what function they play. This is a definition of what is analogous I've taken from Merriam-Webster dictionary. You can also see Oxford dictionary to understand what does analogous term mean. Okay, it is not exactly opposite like it's said in the book, but it actually means that we can actually compare two very different structures based on the fact that they have a particular similarity. So here the similarity is function. So here, the anatomical structures in terms of convergent evolution will be called analogous. These are the few examples of convergent evolution in play in nature. Okay. Um, Also, one should note that the organisms who have converged, okay, in order to survive in a particular habitat, they have different ancestors. Okay, they come from different lines of ancestry. So examples, as I was saying, the bat wing, okay, the butterfly wing, the bird wing. So all these three types of wings perform the same function of flying. But when we see the anatomical structure of these wings, they are very, very different. Okay? Similarly, organisms like fish, means the shark, penguin, the dolphins, all all have flippers. Okay, all have flippers. So the flip structures. Okay, so here for the shark it is called fin. For penguin it is called a wing, although it is a flightless bird. Then for dolphin it is called a flipper. So the this this structure is anatomically completely different from each other. As you can see, the bone structure is completely different. But all these three structures help these organisms to swim. Like penguins can swim in water, right? And obviously dolphin and shark do swim. So although they belong to completely different completely different classes of animal kingdom, and but since they are living in similar habitat, that is water. So penguins live close to water, and mammals like dolphin and shark do live in water. So the water is a similar habitat. So they had to evolve their anatomical structure in order to swim. Okay. Now, another evidence for evolution comes from studying how the living organisms have evolved in response to our activity, that is human activity. So that is called anthropogenic action. Okay, anthropogenicity means uh, anything that is controlled by or influenced by human activity. So our presence on Earth actually affected or gave influenced the evolution process of other living organisms. So how? First example is that the farmers they actually breed, right? They breed animals, they breed plants, flowers, crops, etc. in order to get varieties of crops displaying only the desired characteristics, for example, resistance to pests, etc. Also, animals are bred, like horses are bred for racing purposes. Dogs are bred for, people want small dogs, or people want very fierce and, strong dogs to protect their homes. So for these purposes, we humans, we have developed very thorough breeding programs. So these breeding programs have actually led to new breeds of like dogs, then plants, etc. And the wild type organisms which were there, they are like very less in number, like hardly they are found. Okay, so our activity have actually influenced and allowed only allowed new breeds to thrive. Another example can be seen when you study about industrial revolution in England. So in response to that, the moths in England, they have evolved. How? So before industrialization in 1850s, people studied that the number of the percentage of white-winged moths, it was greater than dark-winged moths, because at that time the pollution was less. So the tree barks, they were covered by white-colored lichens. Okay, and in order to protect themselves from predators, the moths use the strategy of camouflaging. Okay, so since lichen covered tree barks were white, so the white colored moths, they were at advantage. Okay, and they could camouflage themselves well from their predators, whereas the dark winged moths, they were easily targeted by their predators, so their population in the area was less. But the situation reversed after industrialization during 1920s. So then what happened? Pollution increased. Okay, the air was, completely polluted, and water was polluted. Everything was polluted. So in response to that, the lichens which was covered on the tree bark, it died. Okay, actually, lichen is actually an indicator of pollution. So that died. Now the tree bark is brown in color or dark colored. So in that background, the dark colored moths, they were at now advantage of camouflaging themselves from the predators, whereas the white colored moths, they were easily spotted by the predators. They could be easily spotted. So ultimately, the population percentage reversed. Now, the percentage of dark winged moths, it was greater than the white winged moths. Okay? So that is how, our activity of industrialization influenced the population percentage. But whereas in rural areas where industrialization was less or the population was really less, there the percentage of white-winged moths was still more than the dark-winged moths. Another evidence of evolution, or another example of how human activity of influence because of evolution, comes from our understanding that today more and more resistant varieties of pests and microbes, etc., are coming up. Okay, because we are using excessive amounts of herbicides and pesticides. So this challenging environmental condition actually triggering, triggering evolution of the pest. Okay, to fight these pesticides and herbicides and survive more. So we get a resistant pest variety. Similarly, for microbes, various kind of bacteria and all, against which we take a lots of antibiotics and drugs. So against so these microbes, they have evolved in such a way that these antibiotics are not at all effective against them. So they are so for them we have to now create new varieties of antibiotics. So this fight against resistant microbes and the production of drugs and all is still, it has like become a new fight, and it all happened because of our way of using the things in excessive quantity, because it is working, so people are using more. but actually it is negatively affecting us only. So, in conclusion, uh, in the three examples, we can say that a population of organism is actually a mixed population, means different members of the population, they have variations among them, right? No two individuals in the population are uh, exactly similar to each other. Okay, so in that population, that is mixed population, those that can better adapt, okay, better adapt to a particular environmental condition, for example, here antibiotics or drugs, they will survive. Okay, so they will survive, and since they will survive, they will increase their number within the population. So that is what has happened for the moths, as well as for the microbes of the pest, okay, as well as the breeds that we are using currently for livestock or animals, so that animals or plants or etc. So they are now very much well suited for particular environmental conditions. So because of which they will leave behind more and more progeny and increase in number in the particular population of say microbes, okay, etc. So that is all for understanding that um, is evolution is actually happening. Okay, is the process of evolution real? Because we have found a lot of evidences to support this. Now, another new concept actually that I will be introducing now is called adaptive radiation. Okay, so what is adaptive radiation? Adaptive radiation is the definition of adaptive radiation, which is present here. It means it is actually a process of evolution where different species who are living in a given isolated, okay, note the term isolated geographical area. But within this isolated geographical areas, there are different types of habitats. Like in a particular area, there is a small place where there is river, okay, there is a small area where it is rich in forest, or there is a small area like where there is only deserts. So in a particular geographical area, there are different habitats. So in that particular type of a geographical area, evolution of different species happen. How they actually start from a point, or this species, they have a common ancestor, and they literally radiate to other areas of geography. That is, they move towards other habitats. That is called adaptive radiation. So how adaptive radiation is different from divergent radiation? Here, divergent radiation actually doesn't happen for, or you cannot explain divergent radiation. Sorry, you cannot explain divergent evolution for an isolated geographical area. It can happen for organisms, okay, for, living in different geographical areas altogether. But in that particular geographical area, wherever they are staying, the habitats is such that um, their anatomical structure, it evolved to perform different functions. So it can happen in different continents, okay, in different continents or in different geographical areas where different habitats are there. But in adaptive radiation, here it is confined. This type of evolution is confined within an isolated area, okay, and within an isolated area, so there was a common ancestor or a starting point, and from that starting point, few progenies of the ancestors, like say, moved northward where there is water, okay, so they developed their features in order to survive near the river or lake or pond. Similarly, another group of progenies of this ancestor, they went and uh, decided to live in a forest, okay, another in the desert, or another in the plains. So and it is happening in a isolated geographical areas. So that is what adaptive radiation means. So we can understand through some examples. Famous example to explain adaptive radiation comes from Darwin himself. So when he was in his sea voyage in his ship HMS Beagle, he went to the island named Galapagos Island, and there he observed the finches. They are a small, not so good-looking birds. So he saw that in these finches, they had different type of beak structure. This is the beak structure that I'm talking about. There are different types of beak structure. So here first finch has a long and pointed beak. So this type of beak actually helped it to eat only or to survive on only seeds and cactus. And another type of finch, it had only short beak. So it could feed not on seeds but rather on the pulp of the cactus. Another finch, it has stout beaks. Okay, so their beaks was more suited to feed on seeds that was present on the ground. Okay, so these are also called ground finches. There's another group of finches, they had sharp and slender beak. So using this type of beak, they could hunt for small insects that lived within small holes of a tree trunk, or within small, burrows within the ground. So they could easily reach those insects and eat. So in this way, depending on what they ate, their big structure evolved, okay, in different directions. So one can say that number one is the common ancestor, okay, which is present at the center, and from which all the other three types of finches, they evolved, okay, in or radiated in different directions. Another example is of the Australian marsupials. So marsupials are the type of a group of organisms who care for their loving ones and care for their childs in their pouches, like a kangaroo has a pouch. Okay, so these type of organisms are called marsupials. So the marsupials, only a group of marsupials that is shown in this particular image, they live in Australia. And Australia is, is an isolated continent, and it is basically in the middle of the ocean. So it is completely isolated from the other organisms that were living in nearby continents. So in that particular isolated geographical area, there was a common ancestral marsupial, and from that ancestor, different types of marsupials like Tasmanian wolf, tiger, kangaroo, koala. So they all evolved. Okay, they all evolved in different directions in order to adapt to different types of habitats. Like koala, they only live in trees, right? Then kangaroo and tiger, wolf, etc. So they all have different type of eating habits, which are more suited to the habitat they're living in. So when more than one adaptive radiation appeared to have occurred, so one adaptive radiation, say of the Australian marsupials, okay, and within the same isolated geographical area, another adaptive radiation has happened for another group of organisms. So like this, it has happened, right? So because of this, one can call this as a convergent evolution, because so you can make more sense of this statement through this particular example. So a group of organisms called placental mammals means those mammals who, where the we are also placental mammals because there is a womb in which the organism, in which the offspring of the organism evolves with inside the womb of the mother. So these type of mammals are called placental mammals. So in Australia, a group of placental mammals also exhibit adaptive radiation kind of evolution. And Australian marsupials, they also exhibit. But a member of the placental mammals, a mole, he evolved to live in a habitat, under the ground. Okay. So, but, and also there is marsupial mole as well, who also lives under the ground. So their anatomical structures, although they are different, but they have evolved to get the similar function of, crawling to the soil or digging the soil, okay, in order to live underground. Similarly, there is mouse, okay. Uh, then there is also marsupial mouse. So similar kind of arguments can be given for, member of the placental mammals family and a member of the Australian marsupials. So that is why this statement is true, that when more than one adaptive radiation appeared to have occurred in an isolated geographical area, although this geographical area have different habitats, one can call this a convergent evolution event. Now, let's explain, let's understand more in detail. Let's understand more in detail the Darwinian theory of evolution, or Darwin's theory of evolution. Let's understand that more in detail. So the two concepts that are there is the branching descent, also known as adaptive radiation, which we just understood. Another is the natural selection. So till now, through the examples or through the evidence of evolution, you might have gotten a hint of what is actually natural selection, or how would you explain natural selection. Okay. But again, understand a natural selection in more detail. So first point to note, the rate of appearance of new life forms is linked to its lifespan. Okay. For example, there are microbes like bacteria, they divide much faster, and they can become millions in number within hours. Okay. So one bacteria will, complete their entire life cycle within few hours and give rise to new daughter cells, to daughter microbes, right? So that is what is being said. So when you're growing up, when you have started with one microbial cell, within few hours in the petri dish, you will get millions of microbial cells. So it is possible to get a new variant or a completely new species of a microbe within days. So within days, we can see a um, new microbial species to have evolved, okay, to a particular, and that evolution has happened to adapt better to a particular environmental condition. But the same thing, for the same thing to happen, that is for emergence of a new variant uh, in other organisms like fish or fowl, where the lifespan of these organisms is years, like even for humans, okay, it would take millions or even billions of years to, get a new particular species of fish or fowl or even a human. So how means in how many time we will get a new species of a particular organism depends on the lifespan of that particular organism. For microbes, since the lifespan is quite less, so within days we will get a new particular species or a new particular variant of a microbe. Whereas for other organisms who live for years, like for humans, it would take millions or even billions of years for a new human species to appear. Okay. Now let's look at this particular example. Suppose in a petri dish, you are growing a population of bacteria. Let's call it bacteria A, which I've labeled with the pink color. And these bacteria are grown in presence of a media component X. Okay, and and what happens is that after say few hours, after few hours, these bacteria A, they are subjected to grow in a new media component, that is component Y. Okay. Now, what would happen to these bacteria A? What would happen to them? So bacteria A, here these are the colonies of bacteria A. Now these colonies, actually bacteria grow in form of colonies, like many bacteria cells will be clustered together. So within this petri dish, you have a population of bacteria A, like a large number of individuals of bacteria A is present. And no two individual is exactly similar, genetically similar to each other, right? And because they have some variations, genetic variations in them. So when a new environmental condition, that is a new component Y was introduced, those bacteria A that had a variation, that had a type of genetic variation, which allowed them to consume the component Y. Okay, only those individuals in the population survived, whereas others who relies on component X for their survival, they couldn't survive. So when you look at the population of the bacteria after few hours, you will see a new variant of this bacteria A has emerged, and that is bacteria P, which is like labeled with white color. This is bacteria P. This is a new variant of this bacteria A, which can now grow in presence of component Y. Okay, so that is that is the example. So from this example, what we understand? We understand that the fitness of bacteria B is better than bacteria A under the new condition. The new condition is instead of component X, there is component Y in the particular medium. So because of which a small fraction of a population of bacteria A, they had the genetic variation that allowed them to survive on component Y. Okay, so they survived, and they reproduced. They divided and divided and made more and more daughter cells. So they were more fit, or they were more reproductive fit than their ancestor, that is bacteria A. So here the new condition is actually the nature. Okay, and nature, remember that nature always selects for the fitness. Nature will only allow those individuals of the population to flourish who can survive better in the given natural conditions. Okay, so nature always selects for fitness. Another point to note about natural selection is fitness is based on inherited genetic variations. Okay, so we get various kind of genes from our mother and father, right? And sometimes there are processes involved that allows introduction of various kind of changes in our genomic makeup. So these are inherited, right? And we will now pass on those variations in genetic makeup to our children as well. So whether our children will survive better in the future environmental conditions actually based on what kind of genetic variations they have received from us. So those organisms are better adapted to survive in a hostile environment. Here hostile doesn't necessarily a hostile environment. It can seem hostile at first, but it is just a hostile. I have used the term hostile in order to suggest that the environmental conditions has changed. Okay, so those individuals or those organisms who can better adapt to the change environmental conditions, uh, only those can survive who have the needed genetic makeup. Okay, so those organisms who have inherited the correct type of genetic variation. Okay, and and these genetic variations they have expressed in that particular organism. So because of which he can better survive in the change in environmental conditions. So that's why whether or not the organism will survive and leave behind more and more progeny, depends on what kind of genetic variations he got from his parents or parental generation. Another thing to note is that the natural resources that is available today it is limited, right? It is not unlimited. It is not. It is going to get used up one day. So natural resources are limited. Also, a population, how much it can grow in number, it is it is also limited, and it is based on what kind of natural resources are available to that particular population. That is why populations, they are stable in size. It is reality, right? But theoretically, if every individual of a population is asked to reproduce, and that too to its maximum capacity, then the population size will be like infinite, correct? But that is not allowed by the natural resources that is available to them. Also, each member of the population, they are having their own type of genetic variation, right? We know through the process of recombination, right? Um, During the individual or the progeny gets some kind of variation in their genetic makeup, and each of these variations, they can be then passed on to their to its next generation. So given that you have understood so far, you will now definitely understand what Darwin said. So Darwin said that the variations which are inheritable and which allow resource utilization, better for few of the members of the population. So these organisms or these members of the population, they would adapt better to their habitat, and ultimately they will be the one to leave behind more and more progenies. Okay? So hence, for a period of time, over many generations, uh, all the survivors from each generation, they will leave behind more progeny in comparison to those who couldn't survive, who couldn't survive, or who couldn't tackle that particular environmental condition. And there would be change in, so hence, within the population. One would observe over many generations that the characteristics of the members of the population will be, there will be a lot of variations in that. Different members of the population, they will be having, different type of genetic characteristics. So overall, a collective change can be seen in the population characteristics where in comparison to say 10 generations before. Okay, and thus a new form appears. So you can understand this through the example of emergence of technology. So the generation of our grandparents or before them, they didn't even knew what is a mobile phone or a tablet or a laptop. Whereas our generation and the future generations who are going to be, more and more tech savvy, from day one itself, they get fascinated with mobile phones and laptops, and they have a natural knack, natural tendency to learn technology much, much faster than, 3, 4 generations back. So that is how the overall population, the new population, that is Gen Z, they have, developed a new population characteristic that is, affiliated to technology, or better, have become a lot better in technology and developing technology. But note that no variant or no particular uh, genetic characteristic is completely wiped out from the population. So there are still a few people among our generation who are still not very much, familiar, or they feel very afraid while using laptop or mobile phones. So they are not that tech savvy. So completely, uh, all the variants cannot be wiped out, even if few survival of few type of organisms is, um, supported or suited by nature to leave more progeny. There will be still few who couldn't survive much and didn't leave as much progeny. So there will be few weak people as well in comparison to, or less fit people as well in comparison to those who are more fit to that particular environmental conditions. So no variant is completely wiped out. So the entire discussion can be, on natural selection can be summed up using this simple flow chart. Okay. So within a given population, the members of the population, they have genetic variations, correct? And now suppose in a given environmental condition, a nature actually challenged the members of the population with a given environmental condition. So only those members will better adapt who have the correct genetic variation. So they will better adapt to that particular environmental condition. So since they're able to better adapt, they will survive, and they'll be selected by nature to leave behind more and more progeny. That is, they will be selected by nature to be more reproductively fit. So in the coming generations, uh, more and more progeny will be there from the person of the previous generation who adapted better to that given environmental condition. Now, if after 2 generations the environmental conditions changed again, then this particular group of people will be at disadvantage, and the nature will now allow another group of people with another set of genetic variation to fight for that reproductive fitness. This is the ultimate goal, to leave more and more progeny of any living organism, continue their species. That is the ultimate goal of any species, and nature always challenge that. So that's it for today's discussion on the chapter evolution. In the next class, we will cover rest of the topics of the chapter. Thank you.